This is Dr. Serrano coming to you with a new podcast. Actually, today's version is going to be uploaded to YouTube, and the reason is because it is going to be a talk on a very important video that was uploaded to YouTube in the past week. This video was concerning the lockdown, or lockdown versus no lockdown, and it was presented by two local, and when I say local, we're in California, I'm in Los Angeles, but two local doctors, Doctors Dan Erickson and Massihi. They are two emergency room physicians that are up in Kern County, and they own several urgent care centers from up in Kern County down to San Diego. Their YouTube went viral early this week, and I believe they uploaded that, or it was either filmed or uploaded on April 22nd of 2020, and then for some reason it was taken off YouTube. It was banned, and we'll discuss that a little bit more as we touch on their subject of lockdown versus no lockdown. And today, what I've done is to touch on this subject. I've invited my good friend, Rob Tauler, who is a world-renowned attorney, Harvard-trained, Ivy League trained, and probably the brightest guy I know. And he'll go into sort of how we came about to filming this, or to start to putting this on YouTube. But we've known each other for a long time, and I appreciate him coming by and being able to open up a discussion more than anything. We're not here to point fingers. We're not here to blame anybody for any opinions. We're here to talk about science and to talk about this good video that brought up a lot of questions. So without further ado, Rob Tauler, thanks for coming.
Thank you for that introduction, Doctor, and thank you for hosting this. I'd like to talk first just about how we got here, and we were discussing the video of Dr. Erickson and Massihi, and I know that I've been fielding questions in my capacity as a lawyer, and of course I talked to my friend Dr. Serrano, and we got into a discussion as to how the community really needed to get some different point of views, and so Dr. Serrano invited me on so that we can get to the bottom of some of the figures and some of the conclusions drawn by the doctors, and to provide a different set of information for people to understand the circumstances as they evolve. So with that, my first question would just be to Dr. Serrano, and if you could, just for those who aren't familiar with your practice and your history, provide some of your background.
Thank you so much, Rob, for coming again. And yes, I will provide a little background of what I do, where I trained, and sort of how I am able to, if not critique, to at least talk about the information that the good doctors here, Dr. Erickson and Dr. Massihi, presented last week. So I am an MD. I am a interventional nephrologist. I'm an interventionalist, so I am the first interventional nephrologist with an ACGME certificate from ACGME accredited fellowship program from the University of Arizona. I was the first one in the U.S. with this special certificate, much like cardiologists once had a special certificate in interventional cardiology, for instance. And I am a kidney doctor. I went to USC Medical School. I did a master's program in genetics as well. I did 7 years after medical school of post-grad training, an internship, a residency, and then 2 fellowships. So you could say that I'm triple specialized. I am board certified. And I have roughly about 18 years experience. I understand that Drs. Erickson and Dr. Massihi have 16 years, so I'm a little above that, but I don't think that's a significant difference, and it should make a big difference in how we assess things. But aside from that, what I also have in common with them is that I'm in private practice, and so I don't work for anybody or for a hospital, etc. I have my own private practice, and I've been doing this for a very long time.
And you mentioned various certifications and things like that. Is there anything in your studies or your experience that gave you some experience with viruses and how they may mutate or anything like that?
Well, above all, in medical school, I aced infectious disease. Not that that matters. I'm certainly not at the caliber of Dr. Fossey or Dr. Birx, because they are infectious disease specialists. But it was one of my favorite subjects. I did ace it. And beyond that, I have published in various journals, in journals of cardiology, journals of kidney, journals of thrombosis, etc. And so that I have various publications that have to do with inflammation and thrombosis and things that are related to infectious disease as well.
Now, the doctors in the video, Drs. Erickson and Dr. Massihi, they mentioned that they specialize in microbiology studies. Can you tell the audience what exactly that is?
Sure. So, going through med school and actually undergrad as well, we take our core science classes, and those consist of biology, for instance, in undergrad, chemistry, physics, and then once we get into med school, we have things like microbiology and infectious disease. I mentioned that I did a genetics program where I took on microbiology as a more in-depth sort of study, and therefore I believe that I am qualified to comment on this, or more than qualified. So microbiology deals with microorganisms such as bacteria and viruses and the way they reproduce and infect people, and these are the things that we study throughout our undergrad, postgrad, med school, and beyond.
So one of the things that stuck out to me was that, and one of the most controversial things about Dr. Erickson and Massihi's video, is that they take information from Kern County, and particularly with respect to testing, and they draw conclusions based on that information. I understand that you've looked at some of those figures for Kern County, California, and you have a viewpoint based upon some of the conclusions they've drawn.
Yeah, so basically, and it's all in the numbers, and I encourage you to watch that video. Even though it has been banned from YouTube, there are other versions of the video that are on YouTube, and you can still watch it. You just have to search for it. But in the beginning, or I'd say first half hour of their video, they present the data that they have in Kern County. They have about 5,000 patients which they tested, and about 6.5% of those patients tested positive for COVID. Those, I think, 340 patients. And what they do after that is they extrapolate, and use that data and apply it to bigger or wide range areas. For instance, Los Angeles or California, and then beyond that, California, the U.S.
Why is it dangerous, or is it dangerous to extrapolate for the different communities in this particular instance?
It is very dangerous to do that because, and in fact, they admit this in their video, that different communities are different, that New York is very different from Bakersfield, for instance, where in Bakersfield everybody is so spread out, and you may not have to quote unquote segregate or socially isolate as you do in New York. So it is a bit dangerous to generalize that way and to extrapolate, because you can certainly run into different environments, different communities, and different numbers altogether.
One of the most controversial statements they made in the video was that COVID-19 was just like the flu. Based on your research, is that something that you believe to be true as well?
I actually, based on my research, I can confirm that it is not like the flu, that it is much more contagious or infectious, The transmission rate is a lot higher than the flu. Not only that, the combination of infectivity and virulence, which is how deadly it is astronomical. So that it is 10 times more infectious than the flu, and it is 10 times more deadly. And actually, if I extrapolate from the data, and that's the calculations that we can do from their own numbers, it is 40 times, and so anywhere from, I would say, 20 to 40 times more dangerous, given the numbers that are up on the Johns Hopkins website of how many people are infected in the U.S. versus how many deaths there have been. So, for instance, in the 1917, and this is data that Drs. Erickson and Massihi brought up, in the 2017 to 2018 flu epidemic, there were 45 million people with the flu in 2017 to 2018. 62,000 deaths from the flu. That was the whole year in flu season. 62,000 deaths out of 45 million people infected. In this current pandemic, this current COVID-19 pandemic, there are already 65,000 deaths in the U.S., but only 1 million people are infected. So it tells you that the death rate is at least 40 times as high. Now, what they can argue is that all of the people haven't been tested yet, and they're absolutely right. And it is very difficult to test everybody in the U.S. and see who is infected. So they may say that 1 million may actually be 10 million, or 20 million. But even then, it's only been a few months since this hit the U.S.
And they do acknowledge that that the data is changing, and they make some contradictory statements about that. But in my opinion, let's just get to the $1 million question. I mean, their conclusion was everyone should be out and about. There should be no lockdown order. In your opinion, should there be a lockdown or not?
Well, in my humble opinion, I think that there should be a lockdown. It certainly should not be, and there were some comments made by them. And this is not. I hope that someday we can have dinner with the two good doctors and I don't know about shake hands, because they would shake hands, but maybe I'll wink at them or something like that. And this is not by any means a way to try to discredit them. But I'll tell you, we should certainly be on lockdown right now, and I think that California has done a fabulous job of doing the segregation or the social isolation and wearing masks. And Governor Newsom has really been a leader in that regard. And I definitely think that we're doing the right thing, despite the consequences that Dr. Erickson mentioned, that there's some domestic violence issues, there's some child molestation issues.
I think at one point he even said this would lead to increased instances of rape, which, coming from a legal background, I don't think, that has any, whether you're at home or anywhere, I don't think it has any legal ramifications with respect to committing crimes.
Exactly. And you being a Harvard attorney, you know exactly what the implications of that is. And the bottom line is that, and I like to quote the New York Governor Cuomo on this, is that that does not equate to death. So depression or domestic violence is very bad. It's very bad. But when you try to equate that to death, that somehow doesn't pan out.
I'd like to now discuss, and we've sort of touched upon it already, but discuss some of the actual conclusions that they make from a medical basis, because I think it's very difficult for people when they see folks in scrubs like yourself, very authoritative. They lend themselves to believe whatever a person in authority says. I would love your opinion on some of the conclusions they draw and some of the things that they said that have drawn some controversy. The first one is that the immune system is built on exposing someone to bacteria, and that the lockdown order will have an impact on your immune system. Do you believe that to be accurate?
Yeah, and so what they're really talking about, this is a concept termed or coined as herd immunity, in that you can go out and basically walk freely in society and infect each other, and your immune system will build in that community or in that population to the degree of certain people not dying, or most people not dying from that disease, and then unfortunately there will have to be some people that do die from that disease. That is sort of the way it happens in cattle and other animals, and it is coined herd immunity. In my opinion, that is sort of a to put it lightly, a brutal way to proceed with this. It's an inappropriate way to proceed.
What do you mean is inappropriate? Herd immunity?
Yeah, in the COVID-19 situation, herd immunity should not be the way to proceed with this pandemic. It would cost a lot of lives. In fact, in the video, Dr. Erickson compares Sweden to Norway and Finland, and says that there really is no difference from that. See the slide on the screen. There's over 2,000 deaths in Sweden now, whereas in, for instance, Norway, there's a little over 200. That's about 10 times the amount of deaths. Norway locked down, and Sweden did not lock down. And everybody in Sweden is running about, going to bars, going to restaurants, and proceeding as if nothing had happened. It has cost Sweden a lot of grief. Dr. Erickson claims that even though it's 10 times as much, or the deaths are 10 times as high in Sweden than in Norway, that because there are millions of people in both of those countries, that it's really insignificant, that there are no differences between one and the other. And if you take that position, then I think you have a lot of explaining to do, not only to the people that died, but to their families and to all of us that sort of either try to model over one country or try to model after another.
One thing they said that really struck me was that when you shelter in place, it affects your immune system on a very short time frame. So in other words, if you shelter in place for a month, your immune system will actually be more likely to contract COVID-19. Is there any science behind that?
Yeah, so again, we go back to the concept that, and they say in the video that the way you build your immune system is you go out and you expose yourself to viruses, bacteria, parasites, etc. And we have our innate immune system and our adaptive immune system, and that for us to become strong, we need to expose ourselves to this flora, bacteria, or these viruses. I think that's, I don't want to say it's an irresponsible statement, but it's a sort of a generalized statement, because there are different types of bacteria and different types of viruses. And you just can't go out there and expose yourself to some of the most deadly viruses and some of the most deadly bacteria. It is true that once we expose ourselves to bacteria and viruses, we begin to build our immune system in such a way that if we get exposed to these viruses again, or bacteria again, that we can attack or defend we can attack those organisms and defend ourselves a lot better. But trying to quarantine ourselves for, or doing quarantine for a few months is not going to damage us a great deal, especially people that have been around for many years. like you and I, for instance, our age group. You have to understand that the immune system has a chronological age. So that, and then we see this in the COVID-19 crisis, in that the very young, for instance, children, do not die from this very much because they have a very strong immune system. Their innate immune system that is composed of macrophages and natural killer cells, for instance, gobble up the viruses and fight the viruses quite well. As you age, just like with anything else in your body, senescence happens. And so
what's senescence for?
Senescence is basically getting old. So your kidney gets old, your heart gets old, your brain gets old, and your immune system gets old. And therefore, to say that, for instance, older people can just go out and expose themselves to viruses and bacteria just to build up their immune system and get it stronger can be a death wish in that sense.
One point that Drs. Erickson and Massihi make as well is that only people who are sick should be quarantined.
Yeah, and that's, so again, not trying to knock anybody down. God bless all the doctors, including Dr. Erickson and Dr. Massihi, but that to me is an irresponsible statement, because and from what I got, unless I'm interpreting it wrong, is that if you're healthy, you can go out without a mask. You don't need to segregate. You don't need to keep, as you saw them on the video, they weren't 6 feet apart like we are, and they could just go back to work and go about their daily lives. And I think that's irresponsible, because they also mentioned when they were saying that the virus shedders, that there would be virus shedders in some of these people.
What's a virus shedder?
So a virus shedder is somebody that is shedding virus, basically, that can make another person or another patient infected or contagious.
So by coughing and so forth, they're shedding.
They're shedding this virus, and why COVID-19 is a lot more infectious than, for instance, the flu or even SARS back years ago, is because the virus shedders, the people that are actually contagious or getting other people infected, don't really have symptoms. A lot of them are asymptomatic. And you can see that when young people that are asymptomatic do not quarantine, do not wear masks, and are free to roam around and shed this virus and infect other people, that this can be very devastating to especially the elderly, to the immunocompromised, and to even children now. We see a lot of children getting infected. They may not die, but we see different diseases come about in children. There was a recent report that Kawasaki's disease, which is a disease of the vessels, and I'm a vascular doctor, so I can tell you about that. But there were several children now that had COVID-19, that were infected, that now have vascular disease. And so there are repercussions to this.
And that kind of brings me to my next point, is that Dr. Erickson and Massihi distinguished themselves from Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx and so forth, and sort of said that some of these doctors are, although leaders in their field, that they're in a, quote, ivory tower, and that they're sort of on the front lines. As a practitioner with his own practice, do you have an opinion on that? Yeah,
well, listen, I'm very similar to the good doctors, Dr. Erickson and Dr. Massihi. I have, like I mentioned in the start of the video, I have my own private practice. I've been here for over 10 years. I do all my interventions here in this OR. I see very sick patients. I see the sickest patients in the hospital, and I do have an economic sort of bias in all of this, in that, we're slow, for instance, here. We're a bit slow. Elective procedures, I'm only doing emergency procedures here, so all the elective procedures have been postponed. And so, it would be easy for me to be biased and say, listen, we need to open everything back up, and we need to get the economy going again. And my pocketbook is hurting, and I need to get that big and fat again, right? I don't think that that warrants making the conclusions that the good doctors make.
And one thing I notice, and again, this is coming from a legal perspective, and you learn to study how people sometimes say inconsistent things. And one thing I noticed in the discussion that they had was that on the one hand, they would say things like, well, Dr. Fauci's conclusions were theoretical because they didn't have enough data. And then later on in the conversation, they say that there's not enough data. However, their conclusion was pretty strident, right? That we should all just go out and live our lives.
Right.
So, how would you address their point that theoretical data and that Drs. Erickson and Massihi are using real data?
Well, let me first mention, and that's a little bit cavalier. Those statements are at least a little bit cavalier. I respect Dr. Fauci immensely. He was first in his class, I believe, at Cornell. Much more accomplished than any of us are. I think that either the good doctors Erickson and Massihi or myself, to challenge Dr. Fauci is treading on, I would say, blasphemy. I think that Dr. Fauci, back in the day there weren't all these subspecialties like there are now. This is back in the 60s, you sort of did a fellowship at the NIH, which he did, and learned everything sort of at the lab or with theory. And you may not have necessarily seen all the patients that, for instance, we see out here. I see lots of patients here. So does Dr. Erickson and Dr. Massihi. In fact, I was only second to Kaiser in venous leg ablations in, I think, 2012, 2013. So I do see lots of patients here and can attest to that. But that being said, I would never say that that what Dr. Fauci has to offer is only theoretical. I think that theory is very valuable, and that theory is based on a lot of controlled scientific trials that are double-blinded, that, for instance, these doctors say that we don't have time to perform, but at the very least, we need to proceed towards that direction and start these controlled trials. And if along the way we see that it favors the people that are receiving a certain therapy versus the people that are not receiving a certain therapy or that are on a placebo, then we stop the trial and we offer this whatever medication in question to the patients that have COVID. So
another thing that was controversial about Dr. Erickson and Dr. Massihi's statements were that they said that doctors were being pressured to put certain causes of death in death certificates. Is there any truth to that you're aware?
Well, that falls back on not that I'm aware. There's no truth to that, but I could imagine that nowadays hospital administrations want to be very certain that certain patients that are deceased or that die do not have COVID-19. Because if they do, they want to make sure that they are counted in the numbers. And I don't think it's because there are other reasons, as they say, at play, whether they be political or conspiracy or anything else. I think it's because it's just the sign of the times. It's sort of part of what's going on right now. And you really do not want to miss any people that are infected with COVID in the death certificate. That also goes back to the notion of when they mention that most people, for instance, that have COVID-19 do not die of the disease, that they actually die of their comorbidities, whether it be diabetes or heart disease or cancer or just something, emphysema or COPD or something else. And that
in that way, and I don't mean to interrupt, but
yeah.
It's an interesting point I don't want to forget. In that way, would you liken it to the HIV virus, in that HIV typically leads to immunodeficiencies, and you end up dying from things like pneumonia because your immune system is compromised? Does COVID-19 share any attributes with HIV?
It does. Actually, it does in a lot, and that opens up another can of worms, because it opens up, for instance, the whole idea of, are we ever going to have a vaccine? We never found a vaccine for HIV. It was very difficult to find one for many reasons. HIV mutates very easily. HIV attacks the recognition mechanism in T cells, so that your T cells aren't able, or your immune system isn't able to recognize the invader, which is the HIV virus. So it is very similar to HIV in that way. What I want to get back to is that the Dr. Erickson was saying that you actually don't die of, for instance, the flu or COVID-19. You actually die of the comorbidities that you have when you get it. What I would argue is that virulence is a factor that needs to be put into the equation, in that if you get, for instance, there's no coincidence that more people, 40 times as many people have died from COVID-19 than from the flu. There are components of the actual flu that are affecting these people and making it a very virulent virus, or it's a very virulent disease. And therefore, it is not just you dying with flu, dying with COVID-19, and the actual cause of death is your comorbidity. COVID-19 is a big, I would say, a big load on your back. If you get it, there's a difference between having that tip your scale over than having the flu tip your scale over. It's not per se the straw that broke the camel's back as the flu is. The actual COVID-19 is the big boulder, the big rock that broke the camel's back. The camel may have had other weight on his back, right? He could have had some backpacks. He could have had you riding it or me riding it. But the boulder, I would say, would most be analogous to COVID-19, whereas the straw would be more the flu. Both break the camel's back,
right,
but one has more of a bearing and more of a, I would say, virulence in that sense.
Doctors Erickson and Massihi comment on two ways to get rid of the virus: that the virus burns itself out and herd immunity, and they propose those as two alternatives.
Yeah. So how is the virus going to burn out? That is probably unlikely that it burns out. We probably need to either get a vaccine or a cure, or else it's going to infect most of humanity on the earth. In terms of herd immunity, if you proceed that way, it's very dangerous. We go back to the case of the slide that I showed on Sweden, and there are 10 times more deaths in Sweden than in Norway. Two very similar countries with similar populations, right next to each other, similar climates, etc. But one is on lockdown, and in the case of Sweden, one is not on lockdown. And so yeah, there's a definite difference in how those will result, and therefore the herd immunity. I don't know if you recently heard, but in Georgia, where they recently opened up and basically started, I don't know if they started going to restaurants again, or they just started going out in public. They recently had a surge in cases, and they had, I think, 1,000 cases in one day. And that was a warning to the rest of the states in the United States that if you open up too early, you're going to get a resurgence in that you can't do the herd immunity thing, or you're going to find yourself with many casualties.
Many times throughout that video, which is now, as you said earlier, went viral and gained notoriety, I noticed the doctors weighing the socioeconomic benefits and even constitutional rights with their assessment of the disease. And I found that to be puzzling, because you don't often see doctors in the role of sort of weighing social impact or economic impact, mm-hmm. and at the same time determining the morbidity of a disease and public policy. Was I wrong to think that this is odd in your role as a physician?
As a physician? Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I really don't like to get involved too much in politics. Number one, too much in legal matters, because number one, people like you would blow me away. I don't know that much about legality, and so I don't want to comment too much on constitutional rights. But I know that it has been a big issue in the media recently, where people have been going out and protesting. Especially nearby here in Huntington Beach, where people want to go to the beach. They're tired of locking down, and they're saying that that their constitutional rights are being infringed upon. And that is valid, except for the fact that the only difference is that you're infringing on other people's rights as well to be healthy and alive. Because it's not only it's okay if you want to go out and contract the disease and die. If you want to get sick and play Russian roulette, roll the dice and see if you die or not, then that's your problem. But if you are a viral shedder and you're asymptomatic and you want to go out to the beach and you happen to be young and healthy, that is not fair to all the other people that you will infect. You may not know that you're infecting them, but there is a real chance that you will infect other people, and it is not fair to those people, because they're going to go back home and infect their grandmothers, and maybe they'll die, infect maybe their kids, and their kids may develop allergies, or as I mentioned, vascular disease, Kawasaki disease, or whatever else. It really that is the difference between this infection and so many other infections, that there is this sort of silent spread, and that seems to be a big component. And in fact, the first 8 to 10 days of the disease, you are very infectious. You are shedding that disease like crazy. And those first 8, 10 days, most people don't exhibit any symptoms from the disease, and so that is where you see how infectious and devastating this disease is.
And in fact, you mentioned Huntington Beach just today. In fact, to bring it back to the legal world for a minute, mm-hmm. a judge sided with Governor Newsom that the shutdown of the beach was constitutional. This just happened today.
Really?
But yeah, and that's just a matter of law and obviously differing opinions. During the video, the doctors implied that there were other forces at play, and that Governor Newsom was being unduly influenced by other forces around him that weren't detailed. But in your opinion, is Governor Newsom's response a good one?
I think it is, and we may have different political views. We are here in California. We're in a Democratic state. The mayor Garcetti, and Governor Newsom have been the first to respond. They've been the first state to lock down. I think they have exhibited good character and good authority and good leadership that other states and maybe the whole nation has not exhibited. And the results are there. You cannot argue with the results. We are the best state in terms of infection, death rate, and everything else. It's just difficult to argue with something like that.
The doctors go on to say that that they do recommend somewhat of a staggered approach to reopening, and that schools should reopen first. Is that a good idea?
Well, again, we're getting back to the children, right? Schools and opening first and sort of using them as our guinea pigs. And is that appropriate? I don't think so, for various reasons. Number one, because children are not completely immune to the disease. This is an entirely different discussion, but even if you don't get sick or it's not apparent that you have symptoms from COVID-19 or any other infection, there is a toll on your body that occurs. And we as specialists or physicians that have been around for a long time know that inflammation is an important factor in every disease, in heart disease, in diabetes, in cancer, in stroke. In every disease, inflammation is a factor. And I would say that over 90% of diseases that you don't know that are affected by some sort of infection or inflammation that are up there as some of the leading causes of death are a result of repeated disease over the years. Do you understand? So even if we have the school children go back out to schools and get infected, it's talking about herd immunity, and they don't die in the first couple of months or the first year, what about the sequela 2 or 3 years later? What about the sequela 20 years later?
What do you mean by sequela?
Well, I mean, sometimes we get infected with certain diseases and it takes a little bit out of us. Every time we get infected, and we know that with this disease, which is the novel coronavirus, we don't know exactly how it functions, but we know that there have been reports of reinfection. There's a famous Argentinian soccer player, Paulo Dybala. He's tested positive 4 times now.
Wow.
Now, we don't know if he was reinfected or if the virus itself was dormant in his body for a while and it sort of showed up again, because we know that the virus hides or harbors in different organs. Now with the research that we've done, we know that there are receptors for the virus in the heart, in the kidney, in the testicles. There's a receptor called the ACE2 receptor. And so it is possible for the virus to be in many parts of the body. The bottom line here is that every time we get reinfected with either the coronavirus or any other infection, it takes a toll on our body. And that's how our hearts degenerate, that's how our brain degenerates, that's how our kidneys degenerate. It's part of inflammation. That's what happens when you get a heart attack, what happens when you get a stroke. It's a sudden burst of inflammation. Some of these diseases that we don't think are caused by infection, or let's say in this case the COVID-19, are actually caused by this. I sometimes, I hate it when people say, and I don't like to get emotional, but when they say, okay, COVID-19 had nothing to do with this. This person died of a heart attack. They're just blaming it on COVID-19. Well, how do you know that the COVID-19 really didn't cause the inflammation to cause an acute MI or that heart attack? And how do you know that in kids, if kids get COVID-19, that they will get some sort of inflammation in the heart and kidneys that will affect them years down the line? We don't know this yet. It is a novel disease. We will find these sequelae out in the next decade, in the next, at least few years. And so therefore saying that we want to engage in herd immunity, or that because we're healthy, we want to go out and do whatever we want and not wear masks and not have social distancing, I think it's really irresponsible. And
and it's getting on, just touching upon your point, where there's so much we don't know about the virus, and just having no medical background whatsoever, but having sort of a background where you look at people's argument structure. Throughout the video, the sort of premises of their argument were, well, we don't know. Why are Dr. Fauci's figures wrong? Well, he didn't know. Well, the virus is changing, so we don't know. And then their conclusion is, well, but we do know we should get back to work. And I think that's one thing that was missing personally from viewing them is they do acknowledge to some degree that there are some things that are unknown and will remain unknown. Isn't that enough to support,
to be cautious?
To be cautious.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a great point. I think what happened with that question in recalling the video is that they got cornered, and they basically said, I think the journalists that were there were saying, well, are you challenging Dr. Fauci because you're saying that you have data from real patients. You're saying that he's in an ivory tower and he's basically just theoretical, and that he hasn't seen a patient in 20 years. Are you challenging his premise? And I think their answer was that they actually see patients. They have the data in front of them that they could share it with us, and that basically Dr. Fauci really doesn't have that type of data. So the journalist came back and said, well, you don't think that the U.S. has data? You don't think Fauci has not only 5,000 patients from Kern County, but hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of patients in the U.S. and the world, and are making sort of conclusions in a more empirical, controlled trial sort of way. And I think they got a bit stuck with that, and just came back to their premise that their extrapolation was accurate from Kern County, and that they could apply that to the rest of the U.S. I actually caught them with some of their numbers were off, but even if they were, even if the numbers that they claimed were accurate were true, it really doesn't justify the mechanism of sort of just going out and playing with herd immunity. It doesn't justify the mechanism of having people just go out and about like if nothing happened. Again, that could be devastating. Sorry to make this a long sort of answer, but there is a slide that I want to show you where it says worldwide sort of infection, and our producer here, Javier, will bring that up. But there is there's people from different political inclinations that have presented a slide where it says coronavirus. I think it was before March 25th in the U.S. from back in February when the first case came up to about March 25th, which is about a month or so. That actually it was a 3-month period. From January to March 25th. So it was a 3-month period, and it showed that a list of different diseases, including COVID-19, on a world scale, and it was the causes of death. In the world, from January to March 25th, there were about 21,000 COVID-19 deaths. There were heart disease, I think, was in the millions. I think abortion was number 1 at 9 million. I don't know how they got to that number. I'd like to see their actual data, and I'd like to verify it. But let's say that those numbers are correct. COVID-19 was last out of like 10 different causes, the 10 to 15 different causes. COVID-19 was only 21,000. That was in March 25th. A month later, we are at 250,000 deaths. 1 month later. That is 10 times, over 10 times what we were at March 25th. Today is May 1st.
And this is with the stay-at-home order.
And this is with the lockdown, okay? Now, those other numbers are representative of 3 months, right? The almost quarter million increase is only a 1 month time scale. So if you extrapolate, so I'm going to do the same thing, if you extrapolate that the other causes of death would stay the same, so there would, let's say, be several million MIs or cardiovascular deaths in the world, let's say, I don't know, 6 to 8 million. I don't have the slide in front of me. 6 to 8 million causes of death of cardiovascular cause. You would have to divide those by 3, right? Now, they would still be more than COVID-19, but the exponential increase has to be noted.
Absolutely.
The amount of death, the number of deaths of cancer, of heart disease, of stroke, of suicide, of car wrecks, of abortion, will remain the same. COVID-19 has multiplied exponentially over 1 month. You have to take that into account. And the other thing you have to take into account is that those other types of diseases have cures. They either have a cure or there are ways to prevent. If you don't want to die of a car accident, you just don't get in the car, or you slow down.
Or if you have heart disease, there are measures you can take to mitigate.
If you have heart disease, there are measures you can take. There are medications that you can take to avoid the heart disease, right? Or to cure yourself of heart disease. If you have cancer, you can get chemotherapy. You can get surgery for resection. So each of those has a way to treat the disease. COVID-19 does not. It makes it even more important. And lastly, COVID-19 kills you within a week. How long does it take heart disease to kill you? Decades? How long does it take cancer to kill you? The most aggressive, maybe 6 months. Some, like prostate cancer, maybe decades. Some of these other diseases, diabetes, stroke, the way you evolve to stroke, you have to have many years of hypertension, for instance. You don't die. You don't get COVID-19, let's say, and last 10, 20 years with this and then die. You die within 2 days. You die within a week if you are immunocompromised or if you have other comorbid conditions. So, from beginning to end, there is a much quicker or sudden, what I call sudden death. That makes it even more dramatic and more impactful. And lastly, with all these other diseases, usually you can have your loved ones around you when you die, so that you have some forewarning. You can they can invite them to the ICU. You can say goodbye to them. With not only is COVID-19 very rapid, but oftentimes, in fact, more times than not, you die alone. You don't even have a burial.
Well, it sounds like, in conclusion, you and I both agree to disagree respectfully with the doctors.
Respectfully. And again, I don't want to, I have enough. I also practice alternative medicine. I'm an allopathic doctor, and I am an MD. I went to the Keck School of Medicine at USC, and I believe I'm a very good doctor. But I've found controversy with other people, and I know that these good doctors have recently found controversy with their own board, their emergency medicine board, which sort of chastised their remarks and their comments. And I want to sympathize with them, and I want to side with them because I've run into issues. There's certain, I do believe that there are certain, I would say, entities, big, powerful entities that sometimes influence the way we do medicine. whether they be pharmaceutical companies or hospital administrations or boards. They certainly influence the way we do medicine, and they're not always run by physicians, and they don't always hold the patient's best interest at hand as the number one reason that they are proceeding the way they proceed. So this is not by any means a way to side with their board or to chastise them. It is basically a way to give my opinion, my own opinion, and open up a discussion, much as they did. Mm-hmm. And you know, the thing that I'm grateful for is you having a well-trained Ivy League attorney here with me, because as we know, we sort of ran into this by chance, and we thought it was interesting, and we sort of were dumbfounded at the fact that so many people were coming down on the doctors, and not only the boards but YouTube and banning them, etc. But hopefully this can open up more discussion about COVID-19, because this is all about learning, and this is all about how the way society proceeds towards eradicating itself from disease.
I agree, and the way you learn is through open dialogue and through fostering free exchange of ideas. So I would agree. Everyone should be entitled to exchange their ideas, and I think in that spirit, I'm very glad you invited me here today, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Rob. And I want to remind you that you know, our podcast broke today. Our Wi-Fi wasn't working, and so they basically threw us out of Facebook. We will be uploading this to YouTube, and I do have a podcast in Spanish and English on Facebook. The Spanish link on Facebook is Clínica del Dr Feliciano Serrano. Why I do it in Spanish is because 50% of the population in California is Spanish speaking, because over the past more than 15 years I've been dealing with the Spanish community. I am in a Spanish neighborhood that I've helped the underserved in for that amount of time, and therefore and I've been on TV, I've been on Univision, Telemundo, and countless other networks, and therefore I know my community well. But now we're trying to sort of break into the English sector as well, because I think that we have valuable knowledge and a valuable opinion, and we are here to. I plan to answer questions in the future in our podcasts, and then do a little bit more teaching on different YouTube videos with different subjects, not only COVID-19, but I am a kidney and vascular specialist and interventionalist, and therefore we have a lot to contribute in medicine. And
your podcasts are weekly in Spanish, serving your community here, and for that I really commend you, because as you mentioned, it is an underserved community, and certainly in medicine and law, in a lot of professions like ours, oftentimes certain communities aren't served, and so we need to make extra effort to ensure that they get the right sources of information, and I commend you for doing that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming again, Rob, and I will see you next time at our next podcast. Thank you so much again for watching.